Good morning, and welcome to Coffee with June. I'm your host, June Scobee Rodgers, and I'm excited to bring to you our very first episode of this podcast from right here in my hometown, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We are so happy you can join us. You may wonder, why a podcast and who is June? I've been called Junebug, Miss June, Dr. June, and jokingly, Lady June. But the truth is, I'm really just June. And a podcast, why? After all, there are about as many podcasts out there today as there are galaxies in the universe. Well, not that many, but close. I'll tell you why I'm so excited about this opportunity, though, because everybody has a story. And I know some terrific people with great stories. There is no one better to discuss these topics than our first guest, the current administrator of NASA, Bill Nelson. Bill, do you remember January 28th, 1986? Where were you?
It's indelibly imprinted in my mind's eye. We had just landed 10 days before January 28th on the 18th. It was a 6-day, almost flawless mission. That is not, would have been the case had we launched on any one of the 4 scrubs. And the first launch attempt for us on the 24th flight of the space shuttle was on December the 19th. What nobody was paying attention to on that day, it was 41 degrees. We were scrubbed for a completely different reason. We were scrubbed because there was a malfunctioning gimbal in one of the nozzles of the solid rocket motor. And so too, over the course of the next several weeks, 3 more scrubs. But a flawless 6-day mission, only to return to Earth on the 18th of January. We had gone through the debrief, and since the Congress was in session, I went back to Washington so I could resume the voting. And lo and behold, I gather our congressional office staff into the office in front of the TV. We're looking at NASA TV for the launch of Challenger on the 28th. And there we watched the unfolding horror that became a trauma for so many people on that day.
Yes, and we also lost crew members from Apollo and Columbia. And to recognize the sacrifice of these astronauts, NASA, you've created the Remembrance Day for all of these fallen astronauts. And Bill, you've been so good to join us at Arlington Cemetery annually to remember the crew members. And thank you for that. But you also are very kind to mention the Challenger Centers that I've spoken about earlier, and that outreach. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, early on, I wanted to help you as you established the Challenger Centers because it was the way of a living reminder of not only the difficulty of space flight, and space is hard. Space flight is hard. As a matter of fact, President Kennedy had captured that in his one of his most famous speeches at Rice Stadium in Rice University in Houston in September of 1962, when he said, "We go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard." And space flight is hard. It's going into a very unforgiving environment and defying the laws of gravity to get out of the gravity of Earth. Uh, but it is an exciting and rewarding experience that is bringing untold benefits to us Earthlings here on planet Earth. So, June, I thank you for what you've done in setting up the Challenger Centers that become not only a memorial to the Challenger crew that was lost, and what you said is true. We've lost 17 astronauts in space flight or in the preparation of immediate space flight, such as the Apollo 1 fire that occurred in a countdown, simulated countdown on the pad. And then 14 astronauts in the Space Shuttle Challenger and then Columbia. What you've done in setting up the Challenger Center is a lifelong educational learning tool for students that they can continue to learn about the fascination of spaceflight and all of the academic subjects of science and technology and engineering and mathematics and all of that that is so essential to our lives here on Earth. So thank you for what you've done.
You've always been kind to help us and guide us. Thank you for that, Bill. You know, there are changes that have taken place after the commission reports. And do you have any additional comments about what you have done at NASA?
Well, we have taken safety very seriously. Uh, Let me just say that you mentioned a day of remembrance for all three tragedies. And it just so happens they all came in this period of late January, early February. And so we have a day of remembrance each year at NASA. And it's another opportunity for us to remind all our employees that those were three tragedies, three accidents that did not have to happen. There was human error. First of all, in the Apollo 1 fire, uh, they did not have a way of escape. It was 100% rich atmosphere, oxygen, 100% oxygen. Uh, the subsequent change to that was a much more ambient type atmosphere on the spacecraft. Uh, so too with Challenger. The cold weather affecting the rubberized gaskets called O-rings. It had clearly been understood by engineers, and management was not paying attention to what the engineers, indeed, the engineers at Morton Thiokol, were begging their company management not to continue the countdown because the night before it had been so cold, down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit. And then with regard to Columbia, another mistake that the top level was not listening to the engineers on the line. They were not listening to the astronauts. I remember my commander, Hoot Gibson, telling about a subsequent flight. He got out after he landed and he looked at the orbiter, and it looked like it had been shredded with a shotgun on all the delicate silicon tile because way back before at launch, there was so much of that foam on the external tank, the big apricot colored tank that carried the hydrogen and the oxygen. And on ascent, that foam would come off. And of course, what happened to Columbia in February of 2003 was a piece of foam about the size of a cooler, about this size. And as the shuttle accelerated on ascent, It came off and accelerating at that velocity just hit the right place of the leading edge of the left wing on that carbon-carbon fiber and broke it into a hole in the wing. It didn't have any problem going uphill, but when they tried to come downhill on the descent, then of course all the hot gases of a temperature in excess of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit got into the wing and broke off the wing. Those mistakes should not have happened. And we remind everybody at this time of year in NASA about those mistakes. And on that day of remembrance, we use it as a re-educational tool in addition to paying respect and honor to the astronauts that were lost and their families. We remind them over and over and pound into them the safety message. If you see something, step forward. Don't you ever have a question about something is not safe, and do not bring that up to the people who can make the decision. And the good Lord has blessed us, at least in this last 4 years, to have not had any major accidents.
Oh, Bill, thank you. Do you know there are 28 Space Medal of Honor recipients for those people that you talked about just now and others that were first to fly in space. Um, One of those space medals hangs on the wall at the Medal of Honor Center here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Um, it is Dick Scobee's Medal of Honor. Um, our children and I wanted to share it with other people. And this Medal of Honor Center is located here because the very first ever Medal of Honor was presented in Chattanooga during the Civil War. Lots of great history goes on here. So, but you've had such success, Bill. I listed some things as I was recalling your activities. You created a solid directive for commercialization of spaceflight. I want you to tell us all about that. And you launched the Artemis program. Not long ago, our president at the Medal of Honor and I went to Kennedy Space Center to visit Lockheed Martin and to look at the different stages of the Orion being built. So that's coming along well. And of course, as you talked about, we during your reign as the administrator, we have had great success and safety. And congratulations to you for all of that. Would you tell us a little bit more about what's planned for the future at NASA?
Yes, ma'am. Well, this is an exciting time. It's the golden era of space exploration. It's not only human exploration as we go back to the moon, this time after a half century, not just to go back to the moon, but to go there to try to learn, to invent, to create in order so that we can sustain human life going all the way to the planet Mars and eventually beyond. The moon is only 3 or 4 days away under conventional propulsion. Mars is 7 or 8 months away. And once you get there, you'd have to stay on the surface a year or two until the planets realign so that you could get back in 7 or 8 months. So it's a much more complicated task. By the way, one of the things we're working on are nuclear thermal and nuclear electric
Wow.
propulsion that could get us there faster to Mars. Instead of the 7 or 8 months, you might be able to get there in 2.5, 3 months. That will be essential for future flights. But that's just one element of this golden age of space exploration. Look at the space telescopes we had put up with the space shuttle, the Hubble Space Telescope up in low Earth orbit. Now we have the James Webb Space Telescope that's positioned at a neutrally buoyant place 1 million miles from Earth, always looking on the opposite direction from the sun. And it is looking back in time in the infrared spectrum all the way to the beginning of this universe. We have captured light, from the formations of the very first galaxies. The universe being 13.8 billion years old, the formation of the first galaxies, that light we captured was 13.5 billion years ago. So we're learning things about the universe that we could never have imagined. We've sent spacecraft to asteroids. We even grabbed a sample of an asteroid called Bennu. We sent another one to the asteroid belt out near the planet Jupiter. It's made of metals. We want to find out what that is. Of course, I'd like to know, is it made of diamonds and rubies and gold? We have even sent a spacecraft to hit an asteroid 7 million miles from Earth to see if we could move it in case if we detected a killer asteroid that was headed straight for planet Earth, that we'd have a chance of saving us by ramming it with a spacecraft at high velocity and moving its trajectory. So by the time it got to us, the two spacecraft that we sent up to tour the planets back in the 1970s, they are now going out into interstellar space, and they are still communicating to us since 1977, if you can believe it. And I've only scratched the surface. I hadn't even told you about the 24 climate spacecraft that we have up there that are measuring specifically what is happening to our Earth's environment on a real-time basis, of which through nasa.gov and earth.gov, you can go on your computer and you can find out real-time information of what's happening to the planet environmentally. And so these are just scratching the surface of what we're doing. And then, of course, we're on a routine basis sending astronauts up to the International Space Station where they continue their research. And just today, we talked to Pam Melroy, our deputy director, a former astronaut commander, by the way, only one of two women astronaut commanders on the space shuttle. The two of us talked to our crew and wished them happy New Year in a direct link up with the space station.
My goodness, what a rewarding career you've had. And thank you for sharing the history and excitement. We think that probably listening to you, there'll be students everywhere who will say, I want to be like him, either to serve their country as a representative or a senator, or to fly in space like an astronaut, or my gosh, to be the boss over at NASA. Thank you.
Well, the only thing that I can claim is I tried to offer whatever leadership I could to a bunch of wizards. I called them wizards. The people of NASA are folks that make the impossible possible. And I'm just amazed by them every day when I see what these folks have accomplished. And so it's been a great privilege for Pam Melroy and me to have this privilege of being a part of the NASA family the last 4 years.
And what's next for you? Where do you think? Senator,
Well,
Administrator Nelson, what's next?
I am going to sequester myself, and I'm going to write my second book. And I don't know what form it's going to take, but I'm going to try to tell about a little Florida country boy that grew up on a ranch, had the privilege of a good education, that was a part of our space program in ways that I did not even know at the time. My grandparents having homesteaded under the Homestead Act on land that is today the Kennedy Space Center, on having grown up in high school with the kids of the people out at the Cape in those early days of catching up with the Soviets, with the first astronauts, of years later of becoming the chairman of the space subcommittee, and then of having the privilege of flying, and then of continuing that chairmanship in the Senate. So somehow there's a story in there, and I'm going to try to tell it.
I'll look forward to reading it. And thank you. Thank you, Bill, for Coffee with June, first ever episode.
All right, and I will salute you, June, with Gatorade at the same time.
And
have a great day.
Thank you. Love to Grace, and thank you, Pam Melroy, for all she does as well. Thank you.
Amen to that. Thanks. Happy New Year.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us on the first episode of Coffee with June. We'll have many other opportunities for you to meet some interesting folks around the country. This has been exciting to visit with Bill Nelson and his story about space and about the future, where we're going in space, and about his successes. And yes, he is always wonderful to join the families at Arlington Cemetery on Remembrance Day. He's a kind gentleman and a good friend. And thank you for joining us and hearing his story. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you the next time on the very next episode of Coffee with June.